Week 11 is in the books. That means it's time to hit those waiver wires to find players that could add value to the back end of your rosters. And quick note, I am going to be referencing rostership percentages in this video, and those are coming from roster data from 1,700 Dynasty leagues on myfantasyleague.com. Basically a 50-50 split of one quarterback in Superflex, all with a minimum of 20-man rosters. So I'm not pulling these players out of nowhere, but it is possible that some or even all of these guys are already rostered in your leagues. But for the most part, there are hundreds of Dynasty leagues out there right now where these guys are on waivers. First and foremost, I want to highlight a couple players that are already very highly rostered, but not exactly 100% rostered that I think need to be. And that includes Dorian Thompson-Robinson, quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, Israel Abanikanda, running back for the New York Jets, Jeff Wilson, running back for the Miami Dolphins, Tutu Atwell, wide receiver for the LA Rams, Isaiah Likely, tight end for the Baltimore Ravens, Jonnu Smith, tight end for the Atlanta Falcons, Cade Otton, tight end for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and Luke Schoonmaker, tight end for the Dallas Cowboys. Again, all guys that are very highly rostered in over 95% of Dynasty leagues out there, but not exactly 100%. So double check your waiver wires and immediately add these guys if they are available. All right, let's get the Thursday night stuff out of the way. Joe Burrow is unfortunately out for the season with a torn ligament in his throwing hand, and the backup for Cincinnati right now is Jake Browning. Now, there is good news and there is bad news here with picking up Jake Browning. The good news is that he's throwing to Jamar Chase, maybe T. Higgins at some point, Joe Mixon out of the backfield. The situation around him is very solid and much better than many other backups who have taken over this year on their teams. The bad news, Jake Browning is not very good, like at all. He's just not a good quarterback. But that may not matter entirely because, like I said, his situation is good with the talent around him, and we have seen bad quarterbacks do decently well against bad defenses. The Bengals do have games still against Jacksonville and Minnesota, who are both currently bottom 12 against quarterbacks this year. And that Jacksonville game specifically comes in a really rough bye week for quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Justin Fields, and Josh Dobbs. So you may be even more reliant on a spot starter that week, especially if you've been really hit by injuries this year. But even if you're not competing, Jake Browning is a good add still to then try to flip to a desperate team, maybe for a couple of third-round picks or even honestly just a fourth-round pick. It's just free draft capital off the waiver wire. So Jake Browning should be added in every single Superflex league that he's available in right now. Next up is one of those aforementioned bad backup quarterbacks against bad defenses. Tommy DeVito had himself a game against the Washington Commanders, 250 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's honestly going to finish as a QB1 on the week. But again, we have good news here and we have bad news. The good news is that DeVito is not entirely lost for fantasy and a complete unstartable player as a quarterback 2 in Superflex. There is hope still, and there is a possibility that he can still put up solid top 20 weeks at the quarterback position moving forward. The bad news, though, is that this came against Washington, who coming into this week was the only defense to allow opposing quarterbacks to accumulate over 3,000 total yards and to throw for over 20 touchdowns on them. And a large majority of that production came before they traded away Montez Sweat and Chase Young. So I don't think that this necessarily means that DeVito is now in consideration as a QB2 moving forward as an every week kind of starter. But DeVito does have one more juicy matchup against a really bad pass defense in week 16, the semifinals of your fantasy playoffs against the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, I don't know what kind of situation you would be in to start Tommy DeVito in week 16, but hey, I thought it was worth mentioning, and maybe you want to pick this guy up. Now, the last quarterback that I want to highlight is Jacoby Brissett, again, as Sam Howell's backup quarterback. Sam Howell once again looked really rough today. After a string of some pretty clean games, he reverted back to Sam Howell-ness, I guess. 3 interceptions on the day, and he also flirted with the injury tent a little bit too mid-game. Brissett, I think, is actually one of the best backups in the league for fantasy football, so if he is still available in your league right now, I would be scooping him up just as an insurance option for the playoffs, especially if you've been riding the Sam Howell wave to a playoff spot. If he gets benched or even injured, don't get stuck holding the bag and have his backup ready to go, especially a pretty decent backup in Jacoby Brissett. All right, at running back now, Royce Freeman actually turned in a very nice day against Seattle and practically cemented himself as the Rams RB1 without Kyren Williams. He rushed for 73 yards on 17 carries and added another 28 yards on 4 receptions. Darrell Henderson did steal a goal line touchdown, but Freeman out-touched Henderson 21-6 in a competitive game script all game long. The only unfortunate part for adding Royce Freeman now is that Kyren Williams is expected to be back this upcoming week in week 12, meaning Royce Freeman is probably going to be relegated back to an RB2 role with very minimal touches behind Kyren Williams. But I still think that Royce Freeman has established himself as a solid handcuff option for the playoffs. In case Kyren Williams gets re-injured and misses more time, you could have the ability to potentially throw Royce Freeman back in if he finds himself in a starter role once again. Which leads me directly into this public service announcement. Now that we're on the cusp of fantasy playoff season, it is so important to be rostering as many handcuff running backs as you possibly can, just in case players get hurt. And this goes to all rosters, rebuilding and competing, because if you're in a dynasty league that doesn't have a trade deadline, as a rebuilder, you can take advantage of a desperate playoff team by selling them a handcuff that suddenly becomes a starter late in the season. And contenders, if you don't want to have to pay for that handcuff later from that rebuilding team, or you're in a league that doesn't have a trade deadline, then you need to be prepared by rostering that handcuff now. So look through your waiver wires, find as many RB2s as you possibly can, and pick them up and stash them for the rest of the season. And then finally, I wanted to highlight a trio of Chargers pass catchers, as this receiving core is pretty empty behind Keenan Allen right now. I already talked about Jalen Guyton last week as a great add as the potential wide receiver 2 in this offense, with upside to be the wide receiver 1 if Keenan Allen's shoulder injury were to take a turn for the worse at any point for the rest of the year. Unfortunately, he was inactive this week with a groin injury from practice, but if he returns this week or next week, he could be a valuable piece to a contender's roster as a high upside flex option in this offense. So he is definitely still very much worth an add in dynasty leagues. The second player is Donald Parham, who's actually second on the team in targets this week behind Keenan Allen with 6, hauling in 4 receptions for 37 yards. Parham's role also was increased because of Gerald Everett being inactive this week. So should Gerald Everett remain inactive moving forward, Parham has a chance to replace Everett's role directly as the tight end 1 in this offense. Plus, he just has that ability to be a huge body in the red zone and catch a couple of touchdowns a game, which we've already seen at times this season. So Donald Parham definitely also worth a pickup in dynasty leagues. And I also want to give a shout out to Darius Davis as a super deep stash. He hasn't gotten much opportunity on offense this year, but he's been really good on special teams for the Chargers this year, including being named AFC Special Teams Player of the Week just a couple weeks ago. Davis is a blazing fast player that has been electric on kick and punt returns this year, and he could see more usage on offense if LA wants to open things up on the field a little bit more, especially if Jalen Guyton misses significant time. He could slide in to that Jalen Guyton role that I really want to covet by picking him up. I also just don't want to pass on the opportunity to say that he is the best rookie wide receiver out of TCU on this Chargers team currently. Sorry, not sorry.
That is one big pile of shit.
But if you're a Dynasty football player and you are not subscribed to this channel, please do so, as we've been dropping Dynasty-specific content all season long, and we are very much looking forward to 2024 rookie content as well. But if you haven't watched it yet, I just posted 8 players that you need to buy before your fantasy playoffs, a couple of which have actually already seen increases in their value based on what they did this past week. So you got to get in now, and you can check out that video right up here.